morning, good morning. Here on this wonderful Wednesday. Grateful for the rain. Grateful for the cooler weather. Grateful for God's word. So we're reading in 2nd Chronicles, chapters 24 and 25 in our one-year daily Bible. We're on about day 211, I think. And the reading's really good, But let's just summarize 2nd Chronicles today. We're reading about Joash, King Joash, and King Amaziah. So, you ever heard the saying that hindsight's 20/20? You know, that when we look back on things, we can see things so much clearer than we can when we're going through things. This morning, I just, as I read, I enjoyed the reading this morning, and then I'm excited about getting to Romans, but we'll talk about Chronicles first. You know, how many times do we have great success? Things are just going good, and then we do something and we mess it up. But when we're in that moment, we're not seeing it. It's like, I've been reading every morning. I've had such a good habit going, but something happens and, I have to get up extra early. I've got an extra duty I have to do on a certain day, so I don't read that day and I don't read the next day. And then the next thing you know, you wake up and you haven't read for 3 days or 3 weeks. And it's like, how did that happen? Wait a minute. It just seems like yesterday that I was reading every single day. I was being faithful. I was doing what I was supposed to. Are you getting what I'm saying? When you're in the moment and life is happening, things just catch up on us. So what caught my attention this morning is what is written about these 2 kings. That here we are, thousands of years later, we're reading the story of these 2 kings. So Joash was 7 years old. 7 years old when he became king. And he reigned for 40 years. Tells who his mother is. And then here's the part that got me. Joash did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight throughout the lifetime of Jehoiada the priest. Did you catch that? He did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight as long as that priest was with him. Throughout the lifetime of the priest, he did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight. And then we read the story, and that's exactly what happened. After Jehoiada died, Joash did evil things. How quickly it seemed that he did evil things. Well, what about Amaziah, King Amaziah? He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. Tells who his mother is. Don't tell me that family's not important to God. Amaziah did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, but not wholeheartedly. What do you want God to write down in his book about you? And once again, we read about Amaziah. And I just, I could just sense it. When Jehoiada the priest was there with Joash, at his beck and call, probably right there at his right elbow, when Joash was making his decisions, there was the priest saying, well, now what would God say about that? What would God do about that? What would God have you to do? And I'm sure there were many times when Joash went to the priest and said, okay, now tell me what God says. Because remember, they didn't get to have this personal relationship. But yet, obviously, Joash's relationship with God was weak enough that when the priest wasn't there, how did he live his life? Amaziah did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, but not wholeheartedly. King Amaziah of Judah lived for 15 years after the death of King Joash of Israel. The rest of the events in Amaziah's reign, from beginning to end, are recorded in the book of the Kings of Judah and Israel. And I thought at that moment as I was reading, what would be different if Joash could go back and written out in front of him was his life, what was written in the book of the Kings? What if Joash had the ability to have his life spelled out for him, written down on paper, and when he read it, he knew it was truth? Would he be stronger? Would he spend time with God more? Would he spend more time with that priest, seeking what God was saying? Would Amaziah, King Amaziah, have a tendency, if he could read what was going to be written about his life? It's all summed up. His life is summed up in 2.5 columns here. If he could read about it, would he make different choices? Would it no longer say, but not wholeheartedly? What if our life was written out? And what if all the times when we just settled in and stopped going to church? What if all the times when we just settled in and everything's okay, kids are okay, I'm making ends meet, so we just stopped praying? What would our life look like? What changes would we make? If we already knew the end from the beginning, what decisions would we make that's different? And I know we can sit there and we can say, well, but we don't know. But we don't have the ability to read it. Really? Really? The Israelites were 3 days into their journey after being in slavery and bondage for 400 years, and they immediately started murmuring and complaining. And we can't see our life in that. We can't see how we have it so good, and instead of being grateful, we complain. We murmur and complain. I think, just this morning, that's just what came up in my mind is, in a way, we really are reading our life on paper, our tendencies, human nature in a fallen world, how the enemy works. It's all spelled out for us right here. If we're not careful, this is what God will write about us. Elizabeth did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight as long as her preacher was around. Elizabeth did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, but not wholeheartedly. We are seeing it written down. We use this every single time we're reading something like that to check ourselves and say, okay, search my heart, oh Lord. See if there be any wicked way in me and lead me on the path of righteousness. Don't let me make the same mistakes that I see since the beginning of time Adam and Eve have made. And then Romans. Wow. So much in Romans. Probably just going to have to read it. Romans 12, verse 1. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you, give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice. A sacrifice means something has to die. A living sacrifice. The kind he will find acceptable. Do we live every day of our life in a way that is acceptable to Christ? Or some days do we compromise? Some days we wake up and I just don't feel good, so I'm just going to slap somebody. It's okay that I'm short with the kids. It's all right, I bit my husband's head off. It's just a day. It's okay that I flirted at work. It's okay I cheated on my taxes. It's okay. Nobody will know. This is truly the way to worship him. To live as though we're dying is the way to worship God. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world just because they say it's acceptable. Doesn't mean that we're not supposed to live for God wholeheartedly. It doesn't mean that we get to compromise and say, well, everybody's doing it. Well, but let God transform you into a new person. He'll change the way you think if you will allow him. But it starts with this first. See, if you suffer from depression, if you suffer from anxiety, if you suffer from murmuring and complaining, if you suffer from whatever you suffer from, you have to first acknowledge that the way you think is broken. If you don't acknowledge that you might actually have some thought processes that are not acceptable to God, then you're always going to struggle with your thoughts. But if you'll say, okay, Lord, obviously I'm off somewhere because when I lay down at night, I can't sleep. Something's off, Lord. Show me. Help me. God will transform you into a new person, and he will renew your mind by changing the way you think. I want to read that again so that I don't interrupt the thought process. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Are you struggling? Okay, we have 24 hours in a day. How much time do you spend allowing God to transform your mind? I mean, we want instantaneous deliverance from any problem we have, and we won't even read a 15-minute thing in the Bible. No, we'll compromise and we'll let somebody else read it to us. We'll compromise and just let the computer read it to us. And yet we don't know why we can't have breakthrough. We don't spend any time praying. We haven't even asked God to show us what's going on inside of us. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Because of the privilege and authority God has given me, I give each of you this warning. Don't think you're better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. By the faith God has given us. Faith isn't something we have to work for. Faith isn't something that we're lacking. God has given us the faith we need. Just as our bodies have many parts and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body and we all belong to each other. We're all one. In his grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. He has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. Acknowledge the gifts that you have and start operating in your giftings, and it will help your mind be renewed into the perfect will of God, into knowing what the purpose is. When you know what your purpose is and you wake up every morning knowing you're going to complete that purpose, anxious thoughts leave by the droves. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much faith as God has given you. Oh, one more time, he talks about the faith that he has given you. See, the world tells us that we just have a lack of faith. We just don't have enough faith. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. God has given you all the faith you need. And it only takes faith the size of a mustard seed. Just as our bodies have many parts, I've already read that. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. Stop thinking you have to be the boss. If your gift is serving, you serve. And you know what? You're not going to be the boss without the gift of servanthood. The only reason bosses are here is to serve. The leaders should be the greatest servants of all. If you're a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others, be encouraging. If it is giving, give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take the responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. So if you have a pencil and paper, write this down. These are the 7 gifts. Number 1's prophecy. Number 2, serving. Number 3 is teaching. Number 4 is encouraging. Number 5 is giving. 6 is leadership. And 7 is kindness. Pray and ask God which of those gifts He's given you. Pray and ask God to develop the gifts that you don't feel like you have so that you're better at it. Renewing our minds. Renewing our minds. Don't just pretend to love others, really love them. What do we do when we don't have that love in our heart? We first have to recognize it's our inability to let God love us first. It starts with our ability to allow Him to love us first. And as we open ourselves up and we become vulnerable at the risk of being hurt or worse, then we fall more and more in love with Him. And as that circle of love is completed, we will become so full of love that we can't help but love others. Hate what is wrong. Hate what is wrong. Stop accepting it, because that's what our culture says, because that's what our world says, because they've passed a law that it's okay. Hate what is wrong. Hold tightly to what is good. Love each other with genuine affection and take delight in honoring each other. Instead of being jealous because somebody else is being honored, we should take delight in honoring each other. Never be lazy. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope. Be patient in trouble and keep on praying. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Oh yeah, I'll repeat that. Bless those that persecute you. Don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. Be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with each other. Don't be too proud to enjoy the company of ordinary people, and don't think you know it all. Never pay back evil with more evil. Never pay back evil with more evil. My mom's on here this morning. Good morning, Mom. And she's always taught us 2 wrongs don't make a right. 2 wrongs do not make a right. And then there's the yeah buts. No, there are no yeah buts. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Do things in such a way that everyone can see that you are honorable. Do all that you can do to live in peace with everyone. Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Instead, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they steal your cell phone, give them money for diapers. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. If doing this, you will in doing this, you will heap burning coals of shame on their heads. Don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. Powerful, powerful teaching today in the Bible. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you have a wonderful Wednesday.